I didn't lose sleep over bills or hurricanes, but the morning I found a yellow slip plastered on my mailbox, it felt like being branded. $50 demanded for a color I never even chose, delivered with a smirk that turned authority into theater. By sundown, another notice slid into my inbox, proof they liked watching us flinch. Within 2 days, their pride sat under lean proof that paper can bite harder than threats. Let me take you back. The slip was already damp when I peeled it from the side of my mailbox. Yellow paper curling at the edges from the Florida humidity. The print bled slightly, but the number was unmistakable, $50. That was the price of my mailbox, or more precisely the paint shade some board member had decided was non-compliant. I turned it over, half expecting another sheet, maybe an explanation, but there was nothing. Just the HOA's crest in the corner stamped above the words, Notice of Violation. "Grandpa, what is it?" Lacey's voice carried from the porch. She was sitting cross-legged, sketchpad on her knees. "Another love letter," I muttered, shaking the paper so she could see the bold print. Her eyes widened. Are we really in trouble?" I forced a chuckle. "Not unless they think pastel green is a crime." The sprinklers sputtered to life down the street, arcing silver sprays across manicured lawns. A golf cart trundled past the patrol officer, raising 2 fingers in a perfunctory salute. He didn't slow down. I unfolded the slip again. Failure to comply with approved community standards. Fine $50. Payment required within 15 days. The font was officious, the kind used for overdue library books or traffic tickets. My thumb left a faint smudge as I traced the words. Down the block, the clubhouse loomed, stucco walls, 2 clean windows tinted dark. The place always gave me the sense of a courthouse pretending to be friendly. I had a feeling I'd be inside soon enough, not for bingo or barbecue, but for judgment. I called the number printed on the notice. After 2 rings, a receptionist answered, her tone as flat as the paper in my hand. "Homeowners Association office. This is Brenda." "Yes, this is Gideon March. I just received a violation notice for my mailbox. I'd like to know the exact clause I supposedly violated." "Sir, the process is to pay the fine first. Then you may submit an appeal." I pressed the phone tighter against my ear. "You're saying I have to pay before I can even question it?" "That's correct," she replied, already sounding bored. "Would you like the mailing address for your check?" "No, I'd like to know what rule I broke." Silence. Then the click of keyboard keys. It just says, non-compliant paint color. My mailbox has been the same color for 5 years. Then perhaps it faded, she said. I exhaled through my nose. "I'm not sending a check until I see the clause in writing." "As you wish," she said, and the line went dead. I looked back at Lacey, who was twisting her pencil nervously. "Well?" she asked. "They think they've got us cornered," I said. "But they're wrong." A curtain twitched across the street. My neighbor, Mr. Phelps, a retired accountant, stepped onto his porch. He saw the slip in my hand and nodded knowingly. "They nailed you too, huh?" he called. "Mailbox," I answered. "Figures, same thing they hit me with last year." He walked down his driveway, hands in pockets. "I paid it. Cheaper than fighting them." "That's what they want," I said. He shrugged. "Sometimes it's easier to just let it go, Gideon." I felt Lacey's eyes on me, waiting. A couple more neighbors drifted out, drawn by the sound of voices. One woman whispered to another. "That's the man they fined this week." I could feel the shame blooming in my chest, hotter than the slip crumpling in my fist. I straightened, flattening the paper against my palm. "I'm not paying to keep quiet," I said more to myself than anyone else. Lacey came closer, standing at my side. "What will you do?" I folded the slip twice, slid it into my shirt pocket, and said, "We'll see if they still like playing by their own rules when someone asks for theirs." The sprinklers shut off with a hiss, leaving the street in damp silence. The clubhouse windows glimmered under the late afternoon sun, unblinking and watchful. The walk down our street felt like passing through a silent gallery of shame. Mailboxes in a neat row, each with faint red chalk slashes at the base. Some lines had already faded into pink smudges, others fresh and sharp. Quiet scars that no one mentioned out loud. I slowed, touching one mark with my finger. The powder streaked my skin dusty against the sweat of a July afternoon. Cicadas screamed overhead. Behind me, Lacey tugged her braid tighter, notebook clutched against her chest. "Grandpa, are those all fines?" "Not yet," I said. "But they're warnings." Across the park, Marlene Ortiz sat at a picnic table under the oak trees watching. She didn't wave. She didn't need to. Her presence was its own underline. I knocked first on Len Porter's door. Len was retired Navy crisp, even in shorts and sandals, a ballpoint pen tucked behind his ear. He opened the door, squinting against the light. "Gideon," he said cautiously. I held up the yellow slip. "Got one of these myself. Mailbox paint color." His jaw tightened. "They fined me last spring. Shade of gray wasn't in the palette. I paid it. Cheaper than arguing. Still have the paperwork." Len sighed, disappearing into the house. He came back with the folder. The receipt was neatly paperclipped to a photocopy of the violation. I asked if I could copy it down. He nodded. Lacey scribbled the details into her notebook, her pencil tapping fast. "You know they're counting on us being too tired to resist," I said. Len shrugged. I did the math. $50 versus weeks of letters. I chose peace. From the living room, his wife called peace. "You still grumble about it every Sunday." He winced, but didn't argue. At the next house, a young couple answered together. Their mailbox was freshly painted, gleaming. The man ran a hand over the railing. "They said our shade was 2 tones too bright," he said, voice strained. "We repainted before they could fine us. Did you agree with it?" I asked. "No," the woman cut in, eyes flashing. "But we've got a baby. We don't have time to fight letters, so we bought another gallon of paint." The baby cried inside, shrill against the cicadas. Lacey's pencil slowed. "That doesn't seem fair," she whispered. "No, it isn't," the woman said gently. "But it's easier." We walked farther, the asphalt soft under our shoes. At the edge of the cul-de-sac, I knocked on a small brick house. A single mom, opened hair tied back, her son hovering behind her. He couldn't have been more than 9. Her hands shook as she spoke. "They fined us for a sticker. My boy put a rocket ship on our mailbox for a school project. Next day, a notice was taped on. Said it disgraced community standards." The boy's eyes dropped to the floor. "I tried to fight it," she said. "But they warned me about additional penalties if I didn't remove it immediately." He cried when I peeled it off. The boy looked up at me, then eyes wide. "It was just a sticker," he said softly. I bent down, meeting his gaze. "I know, and it was a good one, I'm sure." He gave me the faintest nod, but his shoulders didn't lift. That moment burned hotter than any slip of paper. A child humiliated over a mailbox decoration. I pulled out a page from my pad and wrote down her story, word for word. She signed it, hesitant but firm. The ink blotted where her hand trembled. Artifact, handwritten testimony. By the time we returned to the park, the cicadas had grown louder, almost deafening. Kids ran through the sprinklers, shrieking with joy, their laughter cutting against the heaviness in my pocket. I counted 3 stories, 3 lives bent by silent chalk marks. Proof that mine wasn't an isolated offense. Lacey nudged me. Across the benches, Marlene still sat, her lips pressed into a straight line, unreadable. She turned her head, slowly caught my eye, then rose without a word. Her sandals slapped softly on the path as she walked away. I folded the testimonies carefully, each page a weight heavier than the slip that started it all. The diner's neon buzzed like a tired bee, the sign's green wash pooling on chrome napkin holders, and a pie carousel that hadn't moved since lunch. Laura Jensen slid into the booth across from me and fanned a stack of papers across the Formica bylaws, photocopied so often the letters had gone soft around the edges. "They can't fine without citing the clause," she said, tapping the header with the side of her pen. "Not covenants in spirit." The exact line. "Brenda at the HOA keeps saying, 'Pay first, appeal later,'" I said. "They like the sound of their own rules." Laura smiled without humor. "Then we'll prefer the state's rules. Start here." She slid a copy to me. Margins were stitched with her handwriting arrows, dates tiny check marks like landing lights. I ran my finger down the page. Section 3.2, I read. The paper rasped. "Fines must reference a codified regulation by number. No number, no fine." Exactly. "And we're not going to play whack-a-mole with notices," she said. "We'll look at their leverage points, assets, governance, the places they don't want light." The waitress topped off our coffee, giving Laura's spread a curious glance. "You too, ordering law with that?" she joked. "Just pie," I said. "The kind that comes with clauses." Laura leaned in, flattening another page. "See this line about the Clubhouse mortgage?" Her nail touched a clause like it could bruise. "If they hold it under the association's name, they're subject to debt covenants. Overreach triggers risk." The Clubhouse. I looked past her through the diner window where taillights rolled by in a red stream. "That building's their trophy case. Exactly why you look there. It's not malicious. It's structural." She slid a yellow legal pad toward me. "We FOIA the documents that aren't theirs to hide deeds, vendor contracts, insurance correspondences. You're a resident. You have standing to examine public filings at the county. I flexed my fingers to shake off the diner chill and the unease of being right. So, start with the clerk's office. Today, if you can, she said. You want paper, not rumor, and when you file, don't say you're mad. Say you're methodical. Methodical I can do, I said. She took a sip of coffee, eyes never leaving the bylaws. Leave with 2 things: a record of the rule they didn't cite and a trail to whatever they pledged to run their show. If that trail ends at the clubhouse, the ground under them isn't as solid as they pretend. I folded my own copy and slid it into a folder. Lacey's been watching all of this. I keep telling her we're okay. Laura softened. Then let's give her pages that prove it. We paid the check, Laura leaving too big a tip, and stepped into fall air that smelled like warm asphalt and fried onions. The afternoon was already thinning into gold when I parked at the Orange County Clerk's office, a low concrete building tucked behind the courthouse. Inside, the air conditioner hummed like a distant generator. Paper and toner hung in the air like an old library pretending to be new. A clerk with a silver name tag looked up. Can I help you? I'm looking for filings related to the Brookhaven Trails Homeowners Association, I said. Deeds, mortgages, vendor contracts, anything recorded. I'll file a public records request for anything not directly accessible. Property records terminals are down the hall on your left, she said, then added, records requests at window B. Fill out the top section completely. At the terminals, rows of screens glowed blue. Laura stood next to me, quiet her presence a metronome. I typed Brookhaven Trails HOA into the search box and pressed enter. A list spilled out, meeting notices the plat that carved our cul-de-sacs into neat bites, a stack of deeds. I scrolled with a growing awareness that this had always been here, waiting for someone to make it personal. Start with the earliest mortgage, Laura said. Then look for renewals. I clicked an entry instrument number 2015-0743E32, Clubhouse Mortgage. The index card on the screen showed a lender name I recognized from the kind of billboards that promised community banking. I printed the index summary. The printer coughed like a small animal. Vendor contracts, I asked. Window B, Laura said. And while you're at it, ask for any maintenance agreements tied to the clubhouse. At window B, I filled the request with slow, careful letters. To records, HOA, filings. Subject, vendor contracts, security agreements, insurance correspondences and deed mortgage documents, association-owned structures, clubhouse pool, common areas. The form asked for contact info. I wrote my home address, then paused. Add email, Laura said quietly. Paper gets lost. Email doesn't forget as fast. I added it and handed the form over. The clerk, a woman with a stack of bracelets and the world's most practical bun, stamped the top. Received. Turnaround. I asked. Depends on the department, she said. You'll get an acknowledgement today. Back at the terminals, I scrolled through images of recorded pages. The scans had that gray halo older copiers give to text fine print swimming slightly. A deed described the clubhouse parcel as if it were a thing, and not the room where residents got told they were out of compliance. Laura pointed. Look at the covenant summary on page 2. I zoomed in. Use and occupancy restrictions shall comply with all applicable covenants. Non-compliance triggering association liability shall constitute default. My pulse quickened. So, if they break the rules while enforcing them, they risk their own default. Laura finished. Which is why bullies love vagueness. Vague doesn't trip covenants as neatly as specific abuse does. She placed a hand flat on the counter. You're doing great. I pulled out my phone and jotted a note. Bylaws, our 3.2 must cite clause. Clubhouse. Mortgage covenant default risk. The room's fluorescent lights buzzed. I scrolled again and froze. There it was, another entry instrument number 2010-11-2289 Clubhouse Mortgage Lien Modification. The word lien sat in the middle like a thin black blade. Laura, I said. She leaned in, shoulder against mine, the smell of diner coffee still clinging to her blazer. Read it. My throat went dry. Modification, not satisfaction. Covenant terms, updated penalties for default. Escrow holdback during disputes. Print it, she said. The printer warmed and the page eased out. I held it at the top corner to avoid smudging the date. The gray letters seemed to harden as they cooled. This isn't a smoking gun, Laura said, eyes scanning. But it tells us the gun exists, and it's loaded with procedures. meaning if they overreach we know which shelf holds the hammer, she said, her tone back to clinician. Next, you file your public records request. Then, we give them the chance to be reasonable while preparing for when they're not. I turned from the terminal to window B and slid the form under the glass. The clerk stamped a second page and handed it to me. Your acknowledgement. We'll email copies as departments respond. Outside, the late light had gone coppery. Cars drew lines of sound across the lot. I leaned against the hood and let the word lean sit in my chest until it took a shape I could carry. Laura stood beside me, tapping her pen against her palm. You okay? I feel like I just found the outline of a door I didn't know was there, I said. If I push in the right place, it opens. She nodded. Doors open. Or they break and someone writes a report. Either way, we'll be there to read it. Thank you, I said. For the pages that prove things. Bring me more, she said, already walking toward her car. Then she paused, turning back, voice low so only I would hear. If they overreach, that building could be collateral. I watched her taillights shrink toward the boulevard, then looked down at the stamped receipt in my hand. The ink bled a little where my grip had tightened. I slid the papers into a folder and set them flat on the passenger seat as if the road could jostle the words out of order. On the way home, the clubhouse's tinted windows flashed between hedges like a reminder. I drove slower past it, measuring the distance between that stucco facade and a word in a county index that could make it ours to question. At the light, my phone vibrated an email. Ping. Public records acknowledgement request received. I exhaled, put the car back in gear and turned toward our street where the mailboxes waited like small sentries in the evening heat. By the time the dew lifted, the tag had already bled a little. Red block letters. Non-compliant hung from a thin plastic tie looped through the flag of my mailbox. The paint along the front edge looked rougher than yesterday, as if the tag itself had scraped it raw. Water beaded on the metal, trembling with the faintest breeze. Lacey stepped out, barefoot toes curling at the cold slab of the porch. Grandpa, stay there, I said, palms open to the air. Just look. She hugged her sweater around her ribs and frowned down the walkway. They did that. Someone did. I crouched and leaned in. The sticker's adhesive had pulled flecks of green loose. Underneath, a paler primer showed through like bone. I took out my phone and snapped a tight shot, the tag, the chipped paint, the timestamp blinking in the corner. Artifact, photo, mailbox, tag, and chip. Behind us, a golf cart idled at the curb across my driveway. The engine made a small mosquito sound. The man behind the wheel sat too still. Cap-low sunglasses, mirror flat. His clipboard lay untouched beside him. He wasn't writing anything. He was just watching. My phone pinged. A new email slid onto the lock screen, subject notice, failure to respect authority. I opened it with my thumb. The wording had that slippery tone I'd started to recognize. Dear resident, this formal reminder addresses your ongoing failure to respond respectfully to HOA authority figures. Continued disruption may result in escalated actions under section. No number followed, only ellipses, as if the law itself had trailed off. Lacey leaned over my shoulder. They sent you that. They sent us that. I held the phone so she could read. Her jaw tightened. That's not fair, she said. Voice small and angry. No, I said. It's not. Another photo wide shot from the sidewalk to capture the angle of the tag and the golf cart in the background. The officer lifted his chin slightly as if the lens could feel the gesture. I framed, exhaled, and tapped, letting the shutter sound count like a pulse. He didn't flinch. When I stood, he put the cart in neutral and rolled forward a few feet as if proximity could settle something he'd decided was unsettled. The cart's tires whispered against wet asphalt. I walked toward him, keeping my hands visible. Morning. He pushed his sunglasses up with one finger. Morning. Do you know who tagged my mailbox? Law's the law, he said, smile shaped like a line drawn with a dull pencil. I asked who tagged it. Compliance issued the notice, he said, nodding vaguely toward the clubhouse, which sat 2 blocks away, just visible through gaps in the hedges. We're just here to encourage adherence. Encourage or intimidate? I asked. He let the silence stretch long enough to feel like a choice. You've been disruptive in communications, he said at last. In your view, I said. In mine, I've asked for a specific clause number. Look, he said, tilting his head toward the tag. It's red for a reason. Red's the color printers make when they run out of nuance. He chuckled, one breath, no warmth. You can appeal after you pay. I opened the email again and held the screen up. Tell Brenda I'll be happy to appeal when someone cites a rule beyond be nice to the guard with the clipboard. His mouth twitched. Disrespect, noted. Record that I said it with a steady voice, I said, and that your clipboard is empty. We stood there in the damp morning for 5 beats, maybe 6. Somewhere a dog barked twice and stopped. The sprinklers across the street cut off, leaving the neighborhood ringing with a new kind of quiet. He put the cart into drive. "Law's the law," he repeated, tapping 2 fingers to his cap. The cart hummed away, careful not to splash. I watched him go, and then turned back to the mailbox. The tag swayed gently. The crack along the paint edge had lengthened just a hairline, but once you notice a fracture, it never looks small again. I took another photo from the side, the chip framed against the curve of the box. Artifact, photo, paint fracture detail. Inside, I laid the phone on the hall table and opened my laptop. Dewdrops dried into faint rings on my cuffs. Lacey hovered in the doorway, twisting the corner of her sleeve. "Are we going to the office?" "In a minute," I said. "First, we catalog what they sent." I forwarded the email to myself with a subject line I could search later. HOA, smear, no clause number. Then I printed it, the page warm enough that a curl ran through it as it landed in the tray. Lacey picked it up and frowned at the language. "Failure to respect authority." "What does that even mean?" "It means they think tone is a rule," I said. "It isn't." "So, we fight it," she said as if testing the sound. "We document it," I corrected gently. "Fighting is loud. Documenting is permanent." She nodded, set the page down, and pulled her hair into a new knot. Midway through saving the photos, my phone buzzed again. A group text from the street's chat. "Heads up, saw the cart by Gideon's again. Be careful what you say on email, they read everything." I stared at the words a second longer than I should have. "Fear doesn't take many letters to spell." I typed back, "They don't read everything, but they count on us thinking they do." A typing bubble appeared, then vanished 3 times in a row. No one hit send. I walked back outside and crouched by the post. There was a thin line of rust beginning where the mounting bracket met the box, almost pretty in the way city decay can be if you squint. "Can you take one of me next to it?" I asked. Lacey blinked. "You want to be in the picture?" "Evidence likes faces," I said. She took the phone and stepped back until the walkway, the house numbers, and a slice of curb fit the frame. I kept my hands at my sides, not touching the tag, the box, or the fracture. "Ready," she said. I let my eyes find the lens and thought of the officer's sunglasses reflecting myself back at me, a smaller man contained in mirrored plastic. The shutter clicked. Lacey checked the screen. "Got it. Email it to yourself and to me," I said. Subject line, mailbox red tag, paint chip. "Hensley, present. Hensley," she asked. "That's his name," I said. "He wants it to feel like officer, but it's just Hensley." She bit her lip. "You sounded mad." "I'm not mad," I said. "I'm recording." We went inside and I printed the photos. A thin stack of glossy rectangles slid out, each one a piece of morning, the red tag, the chip, the idle cart, my own face caught mid-exhale. I dated them in the lower right corner with a ballpoint pen. Ink sunk slightly into the finish, leaving a faint ridge. Grandpa Lacey asked softer now. "Yeah. If we do all this, will they stop? They'll adjust," I said. "Stopping is a different verb." She nodded like she understood more than she wanted to. I slipped the photos and the printed email into a clear sleeve and clipped it into a binder behind a tab that read, "Mailbox Evidence." The binder's rings clicked shut with a small metallic sigh. The house felt colder than outside. I could hear our own refrigerator motor and faintly the cart again somewhere down the block. I looked at the sleeve, a red tag pressed flat under plastic, and felt the morning settle into something less like a scene and more like a record. Lacey hovered beside the table, eyes moving between my hands and the binder. What now? I closed the cover and ran my knuckle along its edge. The complaint form lay on the second shelf of the hall table where I'd tucked it last week like an idea I was still deciding to have. I pulled it free, set it down, and uncapped a pen. "We escalate," I said, reaching for the first line where my name would go. The ink touched paper and held there a dot, deepening, ready to become a stroke. The complaint form sat under my palm, the paper still warm from the printer. The signature line stared back at me like a dare. My pen hovered point, darkening a tiny blot that looked bigger than it should have. Lacey leaned against the doorframe, pencil tapping against her notebook like a clock she couldn't silence. "Are you really going to send it?" I looked past her out my office window. Across the cul-de-sac, the clubhouse lights glowed earlier than usual, spilling a yellow stain across stucco and shrubs. Either the board couldn't sleep, or they had called a meeting before dawn. Either way, the nerves were showing. "I don't have a choice," I said. They gave me the rope. I'm just tying the knot. The binder lay open on my desk, pages fanned into neat, color-coded tabs. Yellow for bylaws, blue for violation slips, red for photographs, the tag, the chipped mailbox, Hensley's smirk. Lacey ran her finger down the tabs, murmuring each label under her breath like a roll call. "Grandpa?" she asked. "Yeah. Which one do you read to them first, the one they hate most?" I thumbed to the bylaws section page creasing under my grip. Clause 3. 2 fines may only be levied if directly tied to a codified rule. Paint color and respect for authority aren't codified. She smiled, faintly tapping faster. So, they broke their own rule. They bent it. Breaking's easier to prove. I dialed Laura on speaker. Her voice arrived clipped and calm like cold water on a bruise. "Stick to exhibits. Gideon. No speeches, no heat. You win by reading, not by roaring." "That's never been my style," I said. "I've heard you in a courtroom," she replied. "Keep it quiet." The printer coughed, dragging out the cover sheet with the docket number and the label for certified mail. I initialed each page one by one, my pen scratching steady despite the tightness in my chest. By the end, my initials looked like a slow heartbeat across the bottom margins. At the post office counter, the clerk wore latex gloves, the smell of sanitizer clinging to the plexiglass divider. I slid the packet through, careful not to crease it. The certified green card slid back to me. My hand shook just enough to notice as I signed pen nib, skating a shallow groove. The clerk stamped it one clean punch of red ink. "Tracking's active now," she said. I slipped the receipt into my breast pocket, the paper crisp against sweat. By the time we got home, the inbox pinged. A subject line glowed bold and merciless. "Emergency hearing scheduled 48 hours. I read it twice before I said it aloud. 48 hours. Lacey froze mid-step. That means they'll have to face us in a lawful forum." Her pencil stopped tapping. She let the words land, then whispered, 48 hours. Saying it back turned it from idea into fact. We sat at the kitchen table, the binder between us. I could hear the mower down the street chewing through St. Augustine grass, the sweet scent drifting through the screen door. On the radio, another hurricane prep PSA ran calm and repetitive. The whole state rehearsed disaster, while my little square of it finally admitted to one. I refreshed the inbox. Beneath the court notice, a new message blinked from the HOA Special Notice Security Presence during hearings. I opened it slowly. The phrasing was careful. Residents should be aware that additional security presence will be maintained near the clubhouse during upcoming hearings to preserve order. I underlined the word presence. Not guard, not officer. Just presence. The kind of word that said nothing but weighed everything. I slid the email across the table. Read that. Lacey's eyes narrowed. "Presence. They're trying to rattle us," I said. "That means we're close." Her fingers traced the green card receipt tucked into the binder sleeve. The inked stamp was still drying, faintly smudged at the corner. Proof that the clock had started and that their 48 hours weren't just mine anymore. The microphone popped once, a cheap little thunderclap, and the room hushed the sound of neighbors deciding to stop whispering. Coffee sat cold on the folding table in back, a film on top, like a tiny pond. The AC vents hummed at a steady pitch you could match your pulse to if you were trying not to shake. I faced the rows of metal chairs with my binder open, tabs like a handful of flags. "Thank you for coming," I said, keeping my voice low enough to make people lean in. "We're here to set a record." Marlene slipped in along the side wall, a plain manila folder hugged close as if warmth could blur ink. Her eyes were rimmed red, but she didn't look away when I caught them. I started with sequence, not speeches. A timeline handout dates brief phrases, no theatrics went down the rows. Hands passed them left, right, left. Exhibit A. I said, holding up the yellow violation slip. No clause number. Pages rustled back at me like a murmured yes. Exhibit B, I said, placing the photo of the red tag on the projector ledge, the glossy surface catching the fluorescent lights. Paint chip time-stamped. Presence of an enforcer clipboard empty. A soft laugh came from somewhere in the third row and then died politely. 2 board observers sat in the back stone faces, writing nothing. Their pens were props, upright, unused. I breathed through the rhythm Laura and I had practiced, show pause, let the room decide. "This isn't about one mailbox," I said. "It's about process. And process is supposed to protect us all." Marlene raised her hand from the aisle. "I have something," she said, voice thinner than I'd heard it. She stepped up, laying the manila folder on my table as if it could crack. Inside, printouts of a board email chain, weeks old but alive on the page. I lifted the first sheet. Subject lines marched like soldiers. A phrase leaped in the middle of the thread, overreach risk. Another 2 lines, lower mailbox optics. "May I read?" I asked. She nodded once. I read exactly 1 line, no more than the rule allowed. Overreach risk exists if fines not grounded in numbered provision. Mailbox optics can be managed at enforcement. Then I set the page down and let the rest sit there heavy with the parts I didn't need to say out loud. A murmur traveled the chairs. A father in the second row pressed his thumb along the edge of his own handout like he was testing the paper for truth. From the back, a voice. They knew. I didn't answer. I pointed to the next exhibit deed and mortgage covenant copies Laura had pulled the references for. "This describes the clubhouse as an association asset subject to debt covenants," I said. "When enforcement breaks rules, the association carries the liability." I held up the index printout where modification lien sat in sharp little type. They made changes in 2017. When you change a door, you can change who has the key. The microphone popped again this time like a hiccup. I clicked it off, then back on, and the room laughed, once the safe kind. From my phone, Laura's text buzzed, "Stay precise." I nodded to no one and moved us to the end. Tomorrow morning, a hearing. Exhibits will be read into the record. That's where rumors go to become paper. In the parking lot afterward, people didn't go home right away. They gathered in small clusters comparing phrases like, "You compare bruises, part surprise, part pride at having something to show." The 2 board observers slipped out the side door, their empty pens still untested. Marlene stood near the corner of the hall with her arms around her middle. "I should have brought it sooner," she said. "You brought it," I said. "That's the only time that matters now." She searched my face for doubt, and not finding it seemed to borrow a piece of breath from the night air. The hearing started at 9 sharp. The room smelled faintly of toner and dust, the way official rooms do, even when they're cleaned. A clerk in a gray blazer took the exhibits, her nails clacking light against the cover sheet as she slid each into the file. "For the record," she said, and began to read violation notice with no clause. Photographs of mailbox tag and chipped paint. Email thread printouts with references to overreach risk and mailbox optics. Covenant and mortgage documents describing the clubhouse as encumbered. Laura leaned toward me without taking her eyes off the bench. "His law firm is already in position," she whispered the words practical as tape. I felt the phrase click into place like a label on a drawer. On the other side, the board's counsel stared at a legal pad filled with lines that looked suspiciously like empty. When the clerk reached the covenant pages, Laura asked for permission to read 1 sentence. The judge nodded. She took exactly what she needed. "Non-compliance triggering association liability shall constitute default under the terms of the mortgage." 2 sentences, no more. No one spoke for a moment as if the words were still arriving. My heart found the AC's hum and kept time with it. The judge's glasses slid a fraction down her nose as she looked at the exhibits, then back at us. She made a small stack, rearranged it, then set it down again. "On this record," she said, "a lien shall be placed on the HOA-owned clubhouse pending resolution." The word landed like a gavel even before the gavel did. Behind me, a neighbor inhaled sharply through his teeth. It sounded like a tire being patched. The board's counsel didn't look up. A bailiff crossed the room and handed him a stamped formal notice. He took it with a professional hand and set it on the table as if it were a placemat. We stepped outside into a pale spring sun. A breeze lifted the corner of my copy, the red file stamp flashing, and then hiding, and then flashing again. People clustered by the low brick wall, phones out, but voices soft. Marlene stood a few feet away, face split between stunned and relieved. "What does it mean?" A woman asked me, her hand on the strap of a tote packed with papers she'd finally decided to keep. "It means the rules get to look at themselves," I said. "And we don't have to pretend they're smiling." The wind tugged my page one more time. Across the sidewalk, the clubhouse's stucco looked ordinary in daylight, a building with AC and a light bill, and now a word attached in the county index that could hold it still. In my head, the title that had started all this finished its own sentence, seized their clubhouse not by fists, but by paper with teeth. I folded my copy once, then twice, and slid it into the binder sleeve. The plastic caught, then yielded with a clean little click. The room behind us kept humming its fluorescent song. The neighborhood, for the first time in months, sounded like a place where talking might matter more than chalk. "Tomorrow?" Marlene asked. "Tomorrow," I said. "We keep it public." She looked at the notice again, and then up at me. "I can live with that." We walked back toward the gate. The breeze had picked up, but the page in my binder didn't move. It didn't need to. The porch fan ticked every third rotation, a little reminder that nothing in the house ran perfectly anymore. Still, when I bent to move the doormat, the sight underneath felt like proof that perfection wasn't the goal. A thick, certified envelope lay there, edges swollen with Florida humidity. Its corners were rough paper furrowed like old skin. Grandpa Lacey called from inside. "Out here," I said, tucking the envelope into my palm. The flap bore the green card stub, stapled firm. Notice of seizure, June 2021. The words showed through the translucent window before I even tore it open. The thunder grumbled beyond the live oaks, the kind of rolling bass that promised rain by dinner time. I slit the top with my thumb, paper toothy against the skin. Inside, 2 sheets, a stamped notice confirming the lien order had matured, and a schedule of compliance steps, timelines for new board elections, restrictions on interim powers. Laura chose that moment to step onto the porch, blazer sleeves dotted with rain. "You opened it without me?" she asked, mock reproach in her voice. I held it up. Couldn't resist. She gave a practical smile, one I'd seen in courtrooms and kitchens alike. "Good. Read it once, then, again slower." We sat at the porch table. Lacey joined us, sketchbook open. Her pencil lines were looser than last year, a tree bending instead of breaking. I laid the notice between us. Laura tapped the heading with one fingernail. "Effective immediately, they can't levy new fines until the election resets the board." "So the machine's unplugged?" I asked. "For now. But rules are funny, they keep running in people's heads even when the power's cut. That's why you need follow-through." She slid out a printed sheet from her folder, Board Transition Memo Compliance Terms. I scanned the bullet points: election timetable requirement for open books, reimbursement committee proposal, artifact compliance schedule. My phone buzzed on the table. Group texts piling up. "Let's form a transparency group. We should review reimbursements. Count me in." Each ding layered over the thunder like raindrops finding their rhythm. Laura leaned back, blazer darkening at the shoulders where drizzle found her. "They're moving without you now," she said softly. "That's what you wanted." I exhaled the sound finally audible even to myself. "Feels strange," I admitted. "Balance usually does," she said. Lacey looked up from her sketchbook. "So the mailbox won?" I shook my head. "No, the neighborhood did." She smiled, small but real. The fan ticked again overhead, steady in its imperfection. Laura pointed to the memo again. Fingertip underlining the line, "No fines enforceable until post-election board seated." "This is your breathing space. Use it." For the first time in months, the house felt like it stopped holding its breath. I could hear the refrigerator hum without layering it with worry. The storm wind shifted, carrying the smell of wet asphalt already slicking down the street. I set the envelope aside, stood and pulled a drop cloth from the corner. Laid it by the post, the old mailbox still wearing its scratches like an unsworn witness. Lacey laughed once when I pried open the paint can. It was a quick, unguarded sound, the kind you keep for yourself. The first drop landed heavy on the brush, bright against the scarred green. Morning light slid across the street, sharp and clear after the rain, and hit the fresh paint. The mailbox gleamed like a small, polished truth numbers catching the sun, as if the metal had been waiting years to shine. I bent to check the edges. Lacey crouched beside me, holding a tiny brush she'd used to finish the house numbers. She dabbed the last corner, then sat back on her heels. "Looks straight now," she said. "It is," I answered, steadier than I'd felt in years. Across the way, the clubhouse doors wore a laminated placard closed under oversight. The tape edges fluttered in the breeze, but the message didn't move. The air smelled of warm asphalt and citrus cleaner. Someone down the block had rinsed their driveway. A flock of kids biked past, helmets bobbing, their laughter ordinary in the best way. Lacey laid the brush across a rag. "So, that's it," I smiled. "That's a beginning." Marlene and Len came walking up, shoulders squared, but lighter. Marlene carried a stack of papers tight against her chest, ink smudges on her fingers. Len, meticulous as ever, wore reading glasses strung on a cord. "We brought updates," Marlene said, holding out the top sheet. It bore the county seal and the crisp type of official tone. "Colleen removed pending review. Special election scheduled for October. Artifact removal letter plus ballot notice." Len cleared his throat, sliding another paper free. "And reimbursements?" he said, his voice half disbelief. "Line items listed here: refunds for mailbox fines, credits for overpaid assessments." I counted them twice. "Make it 3, I said, passing the page to Lacey. She traced the columns with her pencil, eyes widening. Neighbors began to gather, 1 or 2 at a time, pulled by the slow magnet of news. Signatures appeared on Marlene's petition stack, names looping in blue ink, shaky or bold, but each a piece of consent. We reattached the metal numerals to the front of the mailbox. The click of the screws seating home was crisper than I expected, like a door closing on a long hallway. Artifact, before/after, photos taped inside binder. Lacey stepped back and lifted her phone. She snapped a picture mailbox centered street stretching behind it, sunlight over kids coasting free. "Looks like ours again," she said. I let the words settle. The storm years had left dents, but the frame still stood. Inside, I opened the binder one last time. The old violation slip sat in its plastic sleeve, yellowed edges curling a little. I slid it into a new divider labeled in ballpoint, "Kept Promises." The page whispered as it settled flat, artifact transformed from wound into proof. On the porch, the fan spun in slow rhythm. No click anymore, just a steady hum. I leaned against the post, watching the neighbors talk sign, laugh a little. Balance didn't look dramatic. It looked like people willing to linger. Lacey nudged me. "Grandpa?" "Yes." "Can we leave the brush out just in case?" I nodded. Just in case. The light caught the fresh paint once more, and the numbers shone like they were counting forward. The morning ended with the faint smell of barbecue drifting from a neighbor's grill and sunlight glinting on the freshly repainted mailbox, its numerals set firm. What began as a slip of paper turned into a ritual of community signatures, schedules, and small acts of repair that outlasted the noise. I realized the lesson wasn't about paint or fines, but about boundaries reclaimed, systems corrected, and neighbors learning to breathe together again. Justice isn't loud, it's steady. If you've lived through your own HOA battles, share your story in the comments. We might all find echoes of hope there.